It's the end of the week, which means it's time for everyone's favorite show, Fan Fiction Friday, coming at you. Colby, hit it.
You are Locked On Mariners, your daily Seattle Mariners podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Ahoy, sailors. It is Friday, February 14th, 2025. This is Titan Gonzalez and Colby Patnode for the Locked On Mariners podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Fan Fiction Friday, the show where we react to your Mariners trade ideas and grade them on the 2080 scale based on things like creativity, uniqueness, if it's realistic or not, all that good stuff. No title sponsor today, but as always, if you want to hear from me and Colby even more and help support the show, check out our Patreon. All you have to do to check that out is click the link in the description of this episode. Kicking us off here on Fan Fiction Friday is Ian, who has a deal with the Boston Red Sox. Harry Ford, Gregory Santos, and Tyler Guff to Boston for Tristan Casas, who we talked a lot about once again on yesterday's episode.
We talked about this yesterday, where the idea that you're going to trade Casas or trade for Casas is probably not a realistic one unless the Red Sox are interested in a bullpen arm, because we talked about trading Castillo at this stage of the offseason. The Red Sox are already over the luxury tax threshold, so do they want to go over the next level? Probably not. So the Castillo thing doesn't really work anymore, and obviously the Mariners aren't and shouldn't be willing to trade any of the other four starters for Casas. So we talked about, how a bullpen thing or how a prospect trade probably doesn't help move the needle much for the Red Sox. So it would have to be a bullpen arm. So it's kind of in this deal, Ian's kind of trying to do a little bit of both, where it's not, hey, you don't have to give up Munoz or Brash to get Casas, but you give up a pretty good prospect and you give up, a bullpen arm, a major league bullpen arm, and then kind of a nice lottery ticket there to try and make it work. And I look at this and I say, what's the reason for Boston to do this? If Santos had repeated his 2023 last year, then I think we might have a conversation here, but he got hurt and he wasn't all that great when he came back. He's healthy now, but I think if you're looking to get like real value out of Santos in the trade market, that probably comes next winter, hopefully after Santos is healthy and has a good year this year, because he certainly does have that high leverage, type of stuff. And that is going to be appealing. I don't think that Harry Ford moves the needle enough for you not to give up Munoz or Brash if the goal is to acquire Casas, particularly since the Red Sox don't have to trade Tristan Casas, although I think they do. I think they would like to, despite what they might say, because they have shopped him pretty extensively this winter. So I do think there's a disconnect there. I just don't think this is enough for them to, give up Casas. I think they would like a Munoz type, and at that point, like we talked about yesterday, the Mariners, probably not inclined to do that as their roster sits right now. So it's interesting. You kind of trying to split the difference here. I just don't know how realistic it is, but I think it's probably like a 45.
Yeah, I just don't think that it's helpful enough. It doesn't make enough sense for a Red Sox team that is absolutely trying to contend this year. Santos is too much of an unknown right now. Yeah. And then Ford, I guess you could kind of look at it as like he's backfilling the absence of Kyle Teal in their farm system. Of course, they traded Teal as part of the return for Garrett Crochet. But yeah, I just don't think this is enough to get Casas to the Pacific Northwest. So I'll go 40 on this. I can see where your head's at with it. And it is kind of like a creative way of trying to attack a Casas deal. But yeah, I think there's just too much up in the air about Santos, and Ford right now is kind of on a downward trend as a prospect at the moment. So I just don't think that gets that done for Casas, and I just don't think that it's valuable enough to the Red Sox for them to move Casas right now when they don't have to. Mariners Talk has a deal with the Brewers. All right, this one's kind of interesting. It's another Harry Ford deal. Michael Morales getting traded alongside Ford to Milwaukee for left-handed pitcher Brian Hudson.
Yeah, so I do think Hudson is better than either of the lefties you have in your pen right now. I think he's probably, if you acquired him and the season started tomorrow, he's probably your second high leverage guy after Munoz. And then, you kind of see what you get from Brash and Santos. But yeah, I think Hudson is in that range where he would be a high leverage option. And he was last year for the Brewers, who had a good bullpen. So would I trade Harry Ford and Michael Morales for Hudson? Yeah, I would. You get Hudson for 5 years. He is pre-arb. So I would. Would the Brewers? I don't think so, because the Brewers are trying to compete this year, and Hudson is their favorite thing, cheap pitching.
Yeah.
So the Brewers will inevitably at some point trade Hudson. It's just probably 2-3 years down the line when he starts to make real money. Until then, I don't think they're going to move him for anything less than just like an insane return of prospects. And I don't think they would consider Harry Ford or Michael Morales that insane. I think they would probably, honestly, they might ask you for Colt Emerson before they'd consider moving Hudson, and the Mariners can't and won't and shouldn't do that. So yeah, I like Hudson, and the Brewers are a team that will do things a little bit unorthodox sometimes. But typically they like to hold on to guys until the last year of their contract. They'll take a little bit less to, hold a guy for an extra year. They've done that a couple times now, even knowing that they were eventually going to trade those guys. They are not going to immediately trade somebody when they start making money, but they're certainly not going to trade a really good arm right now who's making the league minimum for prospects. At least not one the caliber of Harry Ford and Michael Morales. So it's an interesting idea, and I like the target. But I just think that it's just not realistic to expect Milwaukee to give up Hudson coming off the year he's coming off of for Harry Ford and Michael Morales. I just don't think that's realistic.
Yeah, the Brewers have a lot of lefties in their bullpen, even after losing Hobie Milner this year. But of all the lefties that they have, Hudson is arguably the best one. He's also really good against righties, or he was last year. So, and like you mentioned, he's cheap. I don't think that gets that done. I think you need to be a bit more aggressive with the package there if you're the Mariners, if you're trying to get someone like Hudson. It's a very similar conversation to what we had about Nardi with the Marlins. Now, Nardi strikes a lot more dudes out, but Nardi's also dealing with injuries, so I feel like the trade values are actually probably pretty much in the same range for Hudson and Nardi. And I think Nardi probably costs you Michael Arroyo, somewhere in that range. And so I would say the same goes for Hudson. So yeah, I'll give this one a 40.
Yeah, I think, and obviously the nice thing about Nardi is that the Marlins are going to take prospects, whereas Milwaukee really doesn't have a reason to. And I would say like this, would you trade Munoz for Harry Ford and Michael Morales? No. And the Brewers are basically in a very similar spot as Seattle. They have no reason to do that either.
Yeah.
So no, I would say probably at 35. It's just so unrealistic. If you get it done for this price, that would be awesome. But I just don't see any way that the Brewers are even going to entertain this. So because it's not very realistic, I would say 35, 40.
Yeah. All right, we will look at more of your trades here in just a moment. But first, a reminder, this episode of the Locked On Mariners podcast is brought to you by wonderful Pistachios. Looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help keep you feeling fuller longer. Personally, I love the no shells variety. It's the perfect grab-and-go snack for busy days. Whether I'm snacking at my desk or on a road trip or just need a quick protein boost, they're always my go-to. And if you love cracking open every shell for that satisfying crunch, the in-shell options are a classic favorite. Get snackin' and get crackin' with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. And you're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. It is Fan Fiction Friday. Let's get back into your trades. Got this one from Jake. Submission from myself at Lanjo and at DJ Manny D 0925. Never heard of any of these
No idea
people.
who those people are.
There's also pictures here. I've never seen those people before.
It's not a very good looking group, I'll say that.
Yeah. So it's a 3-team deal with the Marlins, the Yankees, and the Mariners. The Marlins take Mitch Haniger on. They also get Tyler Guff, Spencer Packard, and Michael Arias from the Yankees system for their troubles. The Yankees get Jonah Bride and Cody Bolton. And the Mariners get Anthony Bender and Marlins prospect Micah McDowell.
I don't know why this has to be a 3-team deal, because like the Mariners could use Jonah Bride too. And obviously the Mariners could use Anthony Bender.
We might be talking about that a little later on.
We might. So, yeah, I just don't think it's enough going to the Marlins. And obviously the Marlins are the key team here because they're giving up the 2 most valuable pieces.
Yeah.
You know, Packer doesn't do anything for anybody. He's just a 4A type of guy. He's Eric Valia. Who cares? I don't know enough about Arias or McDowell to kind of properly value them in this deal. But again, the Marlins are giving up Bride and Bender, and they're taking on Haniger, Guff, Packard, and Arias. Like, that's not enough to take on the all $17 million and give up a couple of, well, one almost certainly valuable piece, and then one, like, you know, if he does what he did the second half of last year, that's going to be a really valuable piece in July. Yeah. So yeah, I think, you know, for the Marlins to be interested in this type of deal, I think they would want like a Michael Arroyo type. They would want maybe even a Felton Celestin type if they're taking on all of that money. And so there's kind of this weird like gray area where or a fine line you're kind of trying to walk here. And I don't think the Yankees having them included in this deal really does anything for the Marlins, because it's really 2 separate trades. Like, the Yankees aren't going to care about Cody Bolton. You're not going to rope them into this with the promise of Cody Bolton. So, yeah, I think you need a significantly bigger prospect package if you're going to get the Marlins to give up 2 of their better assets and take on $15 million of Haniger's money. So, you know, props for creativity, but realism and valuation, I think you're a bit off on both of those.
Yeah, the Marlins are getting screwed here.
Which, I mean, you know, they've done to themselves a lot in recent years. So if a team is going to shoot themselves in the foot like this, it's probably the Marlins or the Rockies.
Yeah.
So,
but yeah, so I'm gonna go with like 30.
Yeah, I think for this deal to have like any kind of merit, you take out the Yankees and it's Bride and Bender to Seattle, and then it's Haniger, and then probably like Arroyo, Locklear, maybe even Harry Ford, like all 3 of those guys, because you're not just paying for Bride and Bender if the Marlins are taking Haniger.
To take on Haniger.
Right. Yeah. You're also trying to basically write a check.
Again, yes, the Marlins need to add payroll for them to be eligible for revenue sharing, but they're still like, they know the position that you're in. They're gonna be like, yeah, we'll take on Haniger, but you do have to give us something for him.
Right. So yeah, and then, you know, kind of probably 2 top 10 and probably another top 12 to 15 prospect on top of it. If you want to get something in the trade, not just get rid of Haniger, it's probably going to cost, I'd say, 3 top 12 prospects to get a Bride and a Bender on top of clearing that money. You start tossing some money in, you know, maybe you only want Bender, maybe you only want Bride, blah, blah, blah. Obviously, the deal changes at that point, but either way, I think you need a more significant headliner for the Marlins to even consider this. So probably 30, 35 at best.
Thank you, people we've never seen before in our lives. Touching Bases has a deal between the Mariners and the Cardinals here. This is a doozy. All right, Nolan Arenado and St. Louis takes all the deferred money, plus Brendan Donovan and Ian Bedell, for Luis Castillo, Randy Arozarena, Dylan Moore, and $5 million through 2027. So is that like $5 million each of the next 3 years? Or just
I think
$5 million spread out through 2027?
I think it's $5 million a year, because I think that would cover the gap between Castillo, Arozarena, Arenado, and Donovan, if you kind of arb it out.
I'm just going to trust you on that. Touching Bases also says, pushing the buttons of Mariners fans. St. Louis needs outfield help and starting pitching. We need infield help. At CPAT 11, let's hear the 35. Is this the 35, Colby?
25. So, St. Louis does need starting pitching, but they probably don't want it to come in the form of a 31-year-old making $23 million a year. A big part of the motivation for the Cardinals winter, which they failed miserably at, by the way, was to trade the contracts of Arenado and to trade the contract of Sonny Gray and kind of try and clear the books a little bit so that they can go out in 2026 after kind of a step back year and compete again. Well, they failed. They didn't move Gray. They didn't move Arenado. So I don't think that Castillo does anything for them. And Arozarena is a year closer to free agency than Donovan. So if you're not going to compete in 2025, and not to mention Arozarena is making $10 million this year. Donovan's making 3.5. Like, that's a pretty sizable bump. So I think,
and also if they are looking to compete again in 2026, Donovan still fits that timeline.
Right. And Arenado for Castillo, like, if the Cardinals are going to eat all that deferred money, like, fine, I guess. Seattle still needs a starting pitcher at that point, like a one that you can trust. So, I mean, I guess you probably go, and you're not saving any money in this trade. So you're going to trade Castillo, and then you're not going to have the money to go out and get like a Andrew Heaney even to kind of try and, patch that up a little bit. And so, plus you also lose your everyday second baseman. I guess the idea here would be that you just move Polanco to second and Arenado's the third baseman. Or is Donovan the second baseman? Like, how do you fit Donovan? Is Donovan the left fielder to replace Arozarena?
Actually, Donovan's probably playing left field for you.
Right. Because, like, what do you do with Polanco? If Arenado is at third and you have Donovan, you would want Donovan to play second, but then Polo doesn't have a place to play. And so, Donovan probably has to.
I'm less concerned about Polo playing or not, and more about what do you do in left field if Donovan's not playing.
I guess Rayleigh.
I guess, but then who's playing first base? I guess Solano.
Like, it just all kind of doesn't quite fit.
And then who's DHing?
Right, Haniger. Garver. So it just doesn't quite fit. Like, it doesn't fit the Cardinals timeline. Are the Mariners better making this trade? For 2025?
That was my next question.
Yeah,
I don't think they are actually.
Like,
I don't think the lineup is actually that much meaningfully better either.
Because you replace a lot Donovan with Arozarena, and then you replace Arenado, or you replace Polanco with Arenado. Like, are those two guys definitely going to have higher WRC pluses? Like, you improve defensively.
Yeah.
But you probably give at least some of that back offensively.
A lot is riding on Arenado is going to be at least like a 110, 115 WRC plus bat.
Right. And again, like, even if you are a little bit better, you're definitely better defensively, but even if you are a little bit better offensively, how much of that are you giving back going from Castillo to Emerson Hancock? Probably all of it.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And then also you lose Dylan Moore, who's your utility guy. So I don't know if the Mariners are better having made this trade. I don't think it matches up with the Cardinals timeline and how they want to do things. Because again, they're trying to get rid of contracts very similar.
I think if they are better after this deal, which they probably are, but if they are better, it's very slight. And there's enough questions here that make me hesitant enough to go, I don't know.
Yeah. It's definitely pretty interesting to like talk it out and be like, well, you get this and this, and then how does that? So it's definitely good there. I don't think it's realistic for either team. I think neither of the teams really walk away with what they want. Mm-hmm. So I think 35-40 is probably about right, but it's definitely like, hey, I mean, would you trade Arenado? Like individually, would you make these trades? Like maybe. I mean, they're all in the ballpark. If you just break it down one player from one player, like, maybe. But when you combine them all together and you combine the team, like when you take it out of the vacuum, it just doesn't really make a lot of sense for either side, I don't think.
No, I'll give it a 45 still because of the creativity, the uniqueness of it. Mm-hmm. But the viability of it, would I do it, all that stuff is really bringing it down.
Yeah, it's interesting. But I just, again, when you take it out of the vacuum, and you put it into the real world, I think it falls apart pretty quick.
You're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. Got a couple more trades to go over. Thank you so much. Ham Swaggerty 69 has a deal here with the Diamondbacks, and this is a doozy as well.
Yeah, I thought you'd like this one.
All right, let's get into this. Geraldo Perdomo, Jake McCarthy, Jordan Montgomery, and $5.5 million cash to the Mariners for Bryce Miller, Harry Ford, and the Diamondbacks are also taking on Mitch Haniger's contract.
You have to look at this as kind of two separate deals. Like Haniger and Montgomery, basically a wash when you include the money. And it's like, obviously, Montgomery really doesn't want to be in Arizona. Arizona doesn't really want Montgomery to be there. So that's just a bad contract swap.
I'm stunned that he's still there.
Yeah. That's just a bad contract swap. Watch the Stroman for Montgomery trade in March. Honestly, Montgomery should be a Marlin. That is a separate thing. And it's like, okay, is that fair? Like, I mean, Seattle definitely gets the better path to a viable big league contributor by getting Montgomery. But, Arizona rids themselves of kind of a bad relationship there. So really what it comes down to is Perdomo and McCarthy enough for Bryce Miller? And I say, hell no.
No.
There's just not enough.
I really like Jake McCarthy. I don't need Jake McCarthy, though. And then Perdomo.
He's a nice player, but he's JP
solid
Crawford.
Player, but he's not the all-star that he was in 2023.
He's JP Crawford. Above average glove, about a league average bat.
Yeah. I'm not trading a guy that I think could be one of the 10 to 15 best starting pitchers in baseball this year.
Right. Plus you're talking about 5 years of Miller for 2 years of Perdomo and 4 years of McCarthy. So you're not even gaining that much club control out of this. So I just think, if I'm giving up Bryce Miller in a trade, I am getting an all-star, an everyday all-star who has multiple years of club control.
Back in this deal.
Right. If I'm giving up Miller, I want Corbin Carroll. And the Diamondbacks should say no to that. But that doesn't mean the Mariners should say yes to whatever their counteroffer is. So Bryce Miller, they're like, hey, do you want Jordan Lawler for Bryce Miller? That's more interesting. But even then I'm like, no, because I want somebody who I know is going to produce, or I feel really confident is going to produce at the big league level. And I don't feel that way about Lawler. I don't feel that way about, Christian Campbell. And obviously a guy like Tristan Casas isn't enough for Bryce Miller.
No,
in my opinion. So Miller is very difficult to move. I also feel like I have a better shot of getting him to sign an extension than I do Gilbert or Kirby because he's further away from free agency. So like Miller might be the guy I choose to build my starting pitching staff around for the next, decade. We haven't even, by the way, talked about that you also have to give Harry Ford up in this deal.
Yeah.
Like, no, you're giving up the best asset by a mile in this trade.
Yeah.
The Diamondbacks have to add on to even get Miller from you in this trade. And because you're not saving any money on the Haniger Montgomery thing, like there's no value attached to that on the Miller side of things. So no, I think if Arizona wants Bryce Miller, it's Corbin Carroll or it's, like Zach Gallen and Lawler. Like it's something crazy. Like, so because, again, like I think Miller is probably, I feel like if you told me Bryce Miller was in like Zach Gallen's like range, I'd be like, yeah. And Miller's making $18 million less. So I need more if I'm going to make that swap. So yeah, I just don't think that Bryce Miller is being properly valued here. But it is a team that we don't talk about a lot in Arizona. It is certainly a unique idea, and it is certainly a different style of trade than we normally cover here. So I give you some credit for the creativity behind it, but it's just a non-starter for me. Like Arizona calls me with this, I probably laugh at them.
For very similar reasons to the last trade that we just created, 45.
Yeah, I'd probably go 40. I just don't think it's close to realistic.
The Mariner Mile has a deal. Why do you want to trade Bryce Miller? Why are we trying to trade Bryce Miller today? Stop it. Stop it. Bryce Miller and Brandon Garcia for Christian Campbell and Cutter Crawford. I'm good.
I'd rather
Christian
do
Campbell's
this.
a really good process. Yeah, I'd rather do this than the last deal.
Right.
But no.
Yeah, no. Like if I'm trading Bryce Miller to the Red Sox, it's like
I don't think people realize how good Bryce Miller is.
Yeah, I think there's just like this idea that like, well, first of all, I think people forgot how good Miller was last year.
Yeah.
In general, but I also feel like people are estimating like how much more is still there to go get, because Miller, like Gilbert, has actually gotten better every year he's been in the big leagues. And oh, by the way, he's incredibly durable so far.
And he's a tinkerer.
Yep.
See him working on this cutter now.
Yep.
Like,
you
what
get him
could
for
that be?
You get him for 5 more years. He's making the league minimum for at least 1 more year. Again, he's incredibly durable. He throws a ton of strikes. Like he does everything you want, and he hasn't even reached his peak yet. And so for that guy, it might be 4 more years on Miller. Now that I'm thinking about it,
I believe it's 5 more years. It's 5 more years because they didn't call.
He'll be Super 2.
Yeah,
this winter, but
but they didn't call him up until May or whatever.
May
it was.
May or June or whatever. So
yeah.
That's just insanely valuable. Like, and to be fair to this trade offer, like Christian Campbell is arguably the best prospect in baseball, and he's pretty much big league ready, or he's really close to it.
Yep.
And Cutter Crawford is a guy that we've talked about. We're pretty sure the Mariners really like Cutter Crawford. And they would consider him a viable replacement in their rotation should they trade a starter. But to me, like if I'm the Mariners and I'm having this serious conversation about Bryce Miller with the Red Sox, you're giving me Campbell, you're giving me Crawford, and you're giving me something else. You're probably like, it's probably Casas. It's probably Roman Anthony. Like I am demanding like 2 potential all-star players in return for Bryce Miller. Because that's how valuable, young, cheap starting pitching is. That's already really good. Like Bryce Miller could win the Cy Young this year, and I wouldn't be shocked.
Yeah,
I wouldn't bet on it, but I wouldn't be shocked. Like Miller's an all-star quality pitcher, and you get him for 5 years, and he's incredibly durable. There's really no injury concern. He throws strikes, and the stuff just keeps getting better and better each year.
Yeah,
I think
we're going to finally start to see the strikeouts come and. All that.
There's a really good shot that any deal you guys come up with Bryce Miller would be selling low on the guy.
Yeah, it just seems like you would be getting out before it gets good. Like it gets really, really good for Miller. So
it's this tie. Would you rather trade George Kirby or Bryce Miller? The answer is neither, but if you had to pick one, who would you rather trade right now? Because I think I'd rather trade George.
think I'm there with you. I think people are going to get very upset about that take, but
Sure.
I don't care because I think Bryce Miller is really freaking good, and I also
to be fair,
kind of see a clearer path to him getting more swing and miss than George Kirby right now.
and to be fair, George Kirby is also really freaking good.
He is
But
one of the best pitchers in the game.
But would it be fair, like to me, and maybe statistically this doesn't hold up, but I kind of feel like George stagnated last year. Like where again, Logan took a big leap, where Bryce took a big leap, where Woo took a big leap. I feel like Kirby would just kind of maintain.
I see Miller as someone that still has another gear or two. Mm-hmm. I don't know if I feel the same way about George Kirby.
Like I wouldn't be shocked if George did have one. Like if we just come out this year and he's striking out 10 guys per 9 and he's just like sub 3 ERA and you're like, okay, there it is. But also I wouldn't be shocked if he would just spent, the next decade of his career about a strikeout per inning, 3.5 ERA, not walking.
If he's just
guys.
this guy. Yeah.
Yeah. He's just this, really good number 2 starter,
which is
super valuable.
Yeah. That's amazing still. Like, don't get me wrong. Like this is not to trash George Kirby. Like,
this is more about hyping up Bryce Miller than it is.
I just think Bryce Miller is really freaking good at this. Yeah. And like, he might be a legitimate top 10 pitcher by the end of this year.
Say this for all the talk people have about like, you got to get Cal Raleigh signed. You got to get George Kirby signed. I'd rather get Bryce Miller signed and locked into an extension than Cal Raleigh right now.
Even with 5 years left on Miller's deal?
Yes.
Oh.
Because he has 5 years left, I might be able to get like 7 years at like $40 million. And Bryce Miller over the next 7 years is going to be worth $200 million.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, if Miller was on the free agent market right now with his resume and with his reputation and with his arsenal and with the numbers he's already put up, even with the limited like resume, just because of time, that's just how time works.
Yeah.
He's getting at least Luis Castillo money on the free agent market, at least right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
So and Castillo's been a bargain for Seattle. So I think, I would prioritize Miller over Kirby, over Cal, even with the extra years of club control you have. Now I should caveat all of this by saying, give them all, pay them all, pay Logan, pay George, pay the entire pitching staff. And if you have enough left over, pay Cal Raleigh. You're going to have enough left over. But again, trying to live in the world of reality here where they're definitely not going to extend all these guys. Miller is the guy I would choose long-term over anybody else on the staff, except for maybe Logan. That one's close. But also seems less likely that Logan would sign an extension here than Bryce. But hopefully we cut to this clip in 3 weeks when Logan signs a 6-year extension with the Mariners. That would be incredible.
Yeah. All right. So getting off our soapbox, talking about how much we love Bryce Miller, let's circle back on this trade here. Christian Campbell, great prospect. One of the best in the game, if not the best in the game. Still wouldn't do that.
No.
For all the reasons that we just talked about with Bryce Miller. So yeah, like where your head's at with this, but you guys need to stop trading Bryce Miller. I'll go 50.
Send us all the Bryce Miller trades and I will pick all of them next week. Yeah. Nothing but Bryce Miller trades, just keep on going a little bit higher and we'll find the line. We'll find the player where Ty's like, fine, I'll trade Bryce Miller. We'll find them together. But
sure.
Yeah, I think this is 45-50. Like I think it's a fair place to start.
It's not terrible. It's not terrible. Yeah.
I just, if I were the Mariners, I would not have interest in this whatsoever.
All right. Last trade of the day comes from
we
Connor.
Had another one.
That's right. Yeah, we got one more. Jonah Bride for Ashton Izzy.
Feels light.
I view Jonah Bride in a very similar light, or like the idea of trading for him in a similar light to the Caballero for Luke Raley trade last year. So I feel like either in this deal, you have to give up a solid major league rotational piece like Caballero was in 2023, or a better prospect than Ashton Izzy.
Yeah, the difference here is that Tampa is always kind of trying to compete at the
Yeah.
very least, and Miami isn't even pretending they care about competing for anything.
Yeah, so the Caballero idea probably doesn't work here, but
right, it's still a better prospect than Izzy.
yeah.
I feel like the Mariners would probably be comfortable with Izzy for Bride, but we have to remember is that Jonah Bride's been good for exactly 2 months in his entire career. And he's 29 years old, and yeah, he plays some third base, plays some second base, probably should be at first base. And there's a shot that you trade for Jonah Bride and he's just nothing, and you DFA him in May. Like, that's a very real shot. And Izzy is kind of an appropriate prospect to take a risk with, for a guy like Bride. It's like, yeah, we'll take a shot, and if it doesn't work, we're not devastated by losing Ashton Izzy. But if you're the Marlins, is Izzy enough? Because if Bride does what he did the second half of last year, the first half of this year, then all of a sudden you have 4 years, 5 years, even though he's 29 years old, you still have this, really good hitter who is going to be available and cheap. So you're going to get more than Ashton Izzy if he's good. So if you're the Marlins, like, why not just take the gamble on Bride repeating? And you can probably get, even if Bride is only like just okay, like he's just a 100 WRC plus for the first couple months here, you probably in this trade market are going to get 2 Ashton Izzies for him. And if he is what he was last year, he might be the most expensive, bat that moves at the deadline, as crazy as that is to say. So I think, the Marlins is just, if you want Bride right now, you have to basically pay as if what he did in August and September last year is just who he is.
It's real.
And so I think that's probably like a Harry Ford or like maybe a Michael Arroyo. And that's too big of a risk for me to take, but it's the exact kind of risk the Marlins should take and just hold him, because again, worst case, they get nothing for him, whatever. Best case, he's good and they get like a top 100-ish prospect for him in July, or a couple of, top 150 types, and they get something out of nothing. Like, Brad didn't cost them anything to acquire. So they're not going to be desperate. He's not making money, right? So they're not going to be desperate to move him. So I think Izzy is the appropriate kind of risk the Mariners should take on a guy like Bride. I think the Marlins are going to want the Mariners to take a much bigger risk to trade Bride right now.
Yeah, I agree on that front. I would probably go 30 on this. I don't think it even gets really much of a conversation started.
Yeah, probably 35. I think to even get a conversation started like this, you'd probably be like, hey, do you want Logan Evans? Like, do you want a Garcia?
Yeah.
I think if you're going to start,
at least someone that's close. Izzy isn't even close.
Right.
So.
Right. It's either one Izzy or it's either one Evans or it's like 3 Ashton Izzies.
Like Izzy, Guff, and
Ford or
a third guy. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Maybe a reliever, maybe a Brock Moore type. And you just kind of throw bulk upside at them. Maybe. But yeah, it's just, I don't think it starts the conversation. It just makes too much sense for the Marlins to be like, we're going to wait and see.
Yeah.
See what we have in July.
Hey, speaking of prospects, next week is prospect week. So we'll do Mailbag Monday on Monday, but Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, that is, those are all going to be prospect shows. We're going to be doing our top 30 prospect re-rank, which probably won't be too different from the last time we did it, because the Mariners didn't trade any of these guys. So they did add a couple of new guys though in the international signing period. So
sure. I think the big question here is, does Ty have Ashton Izzy in his top 30?
I guess
tune in next week. You'll probably, I can't imagine it will take past Tuesday for you to find out,
because I'm sure people are just on the edge of their seat wondering, where is Ashton Izzy going to land on the Locked On Mariners top 30 prospect list? What a teaser that is, right? Yeah.
Like, tune in on Tuesday to find out how we feel about Ashton Izzy.
That's just going to rake in the views, Colby. All right. Well, that's going to do it for us. We'll see you guys next week. Thanks so much for joining us here on the Locked On Mariners podcast. For Colby Patnode, I'm Titan Gonzalez. Be sure to give us a follow on Twitter at @LO_Mariners. You can follow me at Titan Gonzalez and Colby at CPAT11. That's CPAT11. We're also on Blue Sky. You can follow me at TDG, Colby at MLB Colby, and the show at Locked On Mariners. Have yourself a beautiful baseball day. We'll see you next time. Peace.